Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here today because we are unpacking a truly fascinating, centuries-old spiritual narrative. We're going to be exploring the true nature of devotion by looking at some incredibly vibrant source material derived right from traditional Indian storytelling. If you've ever found yourself wondering whether spirituality is all about, following a strict checklist of rigid rules, or if it's maybe about something much simpler and more profound, well, this explainer is going to give you a whole lot to think about.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Why on earth did Thakurji jump into a giant pot of kadi? For context, kadi is a savory yogurt curry. I mean, it sounds almost absurd for a divine figure to do that, right? But this question perfectly sets the stage for everything we're about to uncover today regarding the relationship between the divine and the devotee.
Section 1. Kadhi mein kude Thakurji, the case of the kadhi.
To solve our mystery, we're looking at the first of three thematic stories in our source material. This one takes place in Rajasthan, India, about 550 years ago, and it focuses on a child deity known as Navneet Priya. Now, Navneet means butter, and Priya means lover, so we are literally talking about the lover of butter. Keep that playful, childlike persona in mind because it's absolutely crucial to what goes down next in the temple's royal kitchens. See, temple worship back then, and honestly even today, involved incredibly strict protocols. The rigid rule was that sweets and sweet rice pudding, known as kheer, had to be placed closest to the deity. That's followed by salty items, then dal, and finally rice. But one day the temple priest made a critical, honestly kind of comical error. He accidentally put a massive pot of kadi, that savory curry, right at the front, pushing the sweets and the kheer all the way to the back.
So, following standard procedure, the priest set up this flawed arrangement, closed the heavy wooden doors of the inner sanctum, and left the deity alone for exactly 45 minutes to consume the offering. But when those 45 minutes were up and the priest returned, absolute panic set in. They opened the doors and the throne was completely empty. The child deity was just missing. They're frantically searching everywhere, creating this massive uproar, until finally someone suggested they check the giant pots of food.
So they check the food and, no way, they actually find the deity submerged in the giant pot of kadi. Naturally, the priest assumed the deity just loved the kadi so much he dove right in. So, for the next 10 days, they literally force-fed him kadi at every single meal. Finally, unable to take it anymore, the deity appeared to the head priest in a dream crying and delivered this completely unexpected explanation. I was jumping for the kheer, but the kadi was in the way and I fell in. He was literally just a kid trying to reach the dessert. The text uses this humorous incident to show us that the divine isn't some stiff, unfeeling statue, but a relatable presence that interacts dynamically with human error.
Section 2. Karmabai ki premamai khichdi, the power of informal devotion.
Now, what's really interesting about this next narrative is how it shifts the emotional focus. It's a deeply touching story about a woman named Karmabai, whose approach to worship broke absolutely every single rule in the book. Let's contrast two styles for a second. Standard priestly worship demands rigid cleanliness, bathing before cooking, formal chanting, and absolutely, under no circumstances, tasting the food before offering it to God. But Karmabai, she didn't know these rules. Left in charge of feeding her family's deity, out of pure innocence and maternal concern, she cooked a simple dish of khichdi without even bathing first. She stirred it with a twig she used to clean her teeth, and get this, she even tasted it to make sure the salt and spices were perfectly balanced, so the deity wouldn't have a bad meal. According to strict ritualistic rules, this food was completely contaminated and ruined.
And this brilliantly illustrates the concept of bhav, which is pure, unadulterated emotional devotion and intention. Because Karmabai possessed this pure intention, treating the deity not as some distant ruler but as a hungry child in her own family. The source text tells us the deity actually manifested physically to eat her supposedly impure food. The narrative argues fiercely here that pure intention and genuine love will always override perfect mechanical procedure.
Section 3. Gargacharya ki kheer ka bhog, the traditionalist's dilemma.
Okay, so this brings us to our third story, featuring a guy named Gargacharya. He is the ultimate traditionalist, a scholar who insisted that without strict, flawless ritual, a connection with the divine is literally impossible. So, while visiting the home of the toddler Krishna, he insisted on cooking his own meal for his personal deity to maintain absolute purity.
First, he spent hours purifying the cooking area with cow dung. Second, he prepared this rich kheer with saffron and cardamom. But right before he could finish his rigid chanting to officially offer the food, the toddler Krishna, totally drawn by the amazing smell, waddled over and just ate it. Gargacharya was furious. He scolded Krishna's mother, Yashoda, threw the ruined food away, and started the grueling, hours-long purification and cooking process all over again. And guess what? Yep, Krishna ate the second batch too.
So to prevent a third disaster, Mother Yashoda locked the toddler Krishna inside a room. Through a little window, the child watched Gargacharya exhaustingly prepare the third batch of kheer. And to make up for all the delays, Gargacharya was adding even more delicious dry fruits, sugar, and rosewater. The narrative builds this wonderful tension here. You have this strict priest meticulously following his rigid rules, completely unaware that the actual divine being is just a few feet away, practically drooling over the dessert.
Section 4. Bhagwan ka Chaturbhuj Roop Darshan, the divine reveal. Let's move on and see how this builds. When Gargacharya finally finishes cooking that third batch, he begins his chanting and demands that his deity come and accept the offering. Hearing the invitation, Krishna breaks out of the room, waddles over, and starts eating the kheer straight from the bowl. Gargacharya opens his eyes, absolutely ready to explode with anger at this naughty toddler for ruining his ritual for a third time. But as he goes to shout, his vision shifts. The toddler is gone. Instead, sitting right before him is the supreme, majestic, four-armed, divine form of God, holding a conch, a discus, a mace, and a lotus. Gargacharya falls to the ground in total shock. The divine figure then takes a handful of the supposedly ruined, impure kheer, eats it, and affectionately feeds a handful directly to the stunned traditionalist. And then comes the ultimate twist of the narrative. The divine speaks to Gargacharya and issues a very strict warning. Do not tell my mother I am God. He explains that Yashoda loves him purely as her child. If she finds out he's the supreme creator, she'll build a temple, start performing rigid rituals, and replace her intimate, pure affection with distant, fearful reverence. The divine, the text suggests, actively hides from rigid rituals because what it truly craves is genuine, informal love.
Section 5. Bhakti mein prem ka mahatva, the ultimate takeaway.
So, looking impartially at all three of these case studies from our source material, what's the unifying philosophy here? Well, we've seen a deity make a clumsy mistake jumping into candy, we've seen rules broken by Karmabai's pure intentions, and we've seen the divine actively reject Gargacharya's exhausting rituals in favor of a mother's simple love. So, the crucial point is this. First, devotion without love is simply empty mechanics. Second, the divine explicitly prefers pure affection or prem over perfect, flawless rituals. And third, treating the divine as family rather than a terrifying distant ruler is what makes the spiritual connection authentic and real. The text is making a profoundly beautiful argument that spirituality should be driven by the heart, not just by a rulebook.
Which leaves us with this final thought. Based on the really compelling narratives we've just unpacked in this explainer, I want you to ask yourself something. Does your own approach to spirituality, or honestly, even just your connection to the things you hold most sacred in life, prioritize rigid rules and perfection, or does it prioritize pure, simple affection? It's a really powerful question to reflect on. Thank you so much for joining me as we explore these fascinating insights, and I hope this leaves you hungry to explore more spiritual explainers with us soon.